Hi, and welcome to Natives in Tech 2022. My name is Aaron Lamonthis. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the head of diversity at SHIFT. And we're a proud sponsor of this year's Natives in Tech conference. SHIFT is a same-day delivery service based in Birmingham, Alabama, which is the land of the Muscogee Nation. We service most of the U.S. and have team members located throughout the country, some of which you'll meet through this conference today. SHIP has an aspiration to build the most diverse tech company in the entire country. And that aspiration starts with honoring, celebrating, and investing in the first people of this continent, as well as Indigenous communities across the world. As such, we thank you for being here, and we hope you enjoy today's fantastic lineup of presenters. Thank you.
Stongo istiamolga hayawat istijari obunaga obunahies. Mujinetadat pomajolagidari pom obunaga pom folida kawabagit iden gislagit moment abigomongit iden hijagathes. Ujihale abe ugalefa onze gohahani shawena onze goedeniha onze keonlaniha yupa onkwa on yuk a onda yuhe ha onfe onkati la de enga. So the translations for Muskogee and Yuchi words is today we lift up our ancestors, our languages, our cultures. We will learn from one another, and before we leave, we will be friends. So just wanted to open it up with the languages that I know, recognizing the different languages that my people speak, and always putting our language and our culture at the forefront, because for many years it was not allowed for that to happen. So it's very important when given the opportunity to do that. Next, I'd like to thank the organizers. So, Emanetalgi, Chamanechka, Marojige Jagesh. So, without the organizers, this conference wouldn't happen. And I think it's going to be a great conference with a lot of conversations. And so, thank you, conference organizers, in making it happen, as well as to our sponsors. So who am I? I am Muskogee, Yuchi, English, and Irish. I was born and raised in St. Petersburg, Florida, but I currently reside in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I helped to kickstart Natives in Tech in 2017 with a few other people. And I'm currently a senior software engineer at Spoonflower. And I've been working in software for the past 6 years in various capacities. I've been individual contributor, a dev lead, team lead, and a manager. So today's talk is Natives in Tech, Past, Present, and Future. And if you're not already familiar, you are here at the conference and listening to this talk. But Natives in Tech is a group of native technologists that are building free and open source software for native communities. So I'd like to start out with a bit of a story to kind of frame the discussion around what Natives in Tech is doing in the context of developing sovereignty in tech. So years ago, Bear and Rabbit were good friends, and Bear had invited Rabbit over to his dwelling to have dinner. And so when Rabbit arrived, Bear asked Rabbit to start making the beans. And when Rabbit started to add beans to the pot, they noticed that there wasn't any fat around to add to the beans, because that's what makes it taste better. And so Rabbit asked Bear where they could find fat. And Bear replied saying, "Oh, I can get that for you," and took a knife and cut a bit into himself, got some fat out, and put it into the beans. And they then had dinner, and they really enjoyed themselves. And the next night, Rabbit invited Bear over to eat at their dwelling. And so as Rabbit was beginning to make dinner the following night, Bear had arrived, and Rabbit was working on the beans. And Rabbit noticed that there wasn't any fat around to put into the beans, and they thought to themselves that they would do what Bear did the other day, and take some fat from themselves and put it into making the beans. And so Rabbit gets a knife, he begins to cut into his body, but instead of getting fat, he injures himself and screams out to Bear for help. Bear sees that he is injured and goes and finds a medicine person to help heal him. And Bear asks Rabbit, why did he decide to injure himself as they were making dinner? And Rabbit replied, "Well, I saw what you did the other day, and I thought that I could do it too." And Bear replies, there's things that I can do that you can't, and even things that you can do that I can't. And so we have to recognize our own skills and abilities in the things that we can do, and not be confused to think that any one person can do what another person or thing can do. So how does this relate to sovereignty in tech? Well, Natives in Tech was established around this idea that we Indigenous people, Native people, are the ones that can create the technology for our communities, and in ways that outside entities can't and probably shouldn't. And what I'm saying here, as it relates to the story between Bear and Rabbit, is that Native people have the skills, they have the experience, they have the social understanding already built in, growing up within the community. And in building technology, they can then apply their experience, their social knowledge to the technology, and it can be built in such a way that is truly reflective of, who they are and where they come from. Now, in comparison with outside entities, outside vendors, quote unquote big tech, they have their own motivations, they have their own interest, but which also might not align with what our community wants or needs. But in addition to that, they don't have the skills, they don't have the social understanding, they don't have the context of what it means to build technology for Native peoples. And so developing sovereignty in tech and developing technology in general, we should be very cognizant and aware of what we're building and how it's reflective of who we are and where we come from, but also that we are aware of and maybe even hesitant to work with outside entities because they don't have the wherewithal to do what Native technologists can do. So I think there's more ways in which we can improve this and make this better. But this is the premise for natives in tech, and for what a lot that we do in the organization is bringing up these ideas, because we aren't merely just consumers of technologies, we need to be producers of it as well, so that we can start to see technology that's truly reflective of who we are. And this is not a new story in the least. Over the centuries, we've been taken advantage of. Our ancestors, maybe even our relatives, have worked maybe with a university, or maybe they haven't. And maybe some entity has taken something from our community and put it in a university, or put it in a museum, or taken a story and then proceed to copyright it so that our community doesn't have the full rights to be able to reproduce that work. And so as this relates to developing sovereignty in tech, of course, Natives in Tech wants to build technology that serves Native communities. But it's also important that we understand that we don't make the same mistakes of the past. That if and when we decide to work with outside entities, we understand the trade-offs and the caveats that come with doing that. But also understanding that first and foremost, we want to be able to do this ourselves. We want to be able to create technology by ourselves and for ourselves, and not need any type of assistance in doing that. That's putting our sovereignty at the forefront. And so that technology can be any number of things. It can be a dictionary. It can be sharing cultural practices. Maybe it's just within the community. Maybe it's just with a group of people. But we have to be conscious and aware of how this technology is really reflective of who we are, but also making sure that it stays within our community and can't be abused by outside entities. And so Natives in Tech, as much as we want Native people to get into technology and take on those roles, we want them to also be considerate of how technology is impacting their community and how they can help to make technology impact their community in a more positive way. But of course, it's never that easy. And so there's many things that we are trying to do in order to improve the representation of Native people in tech, so that we can have more broad, more deep discussions about sovereignty and how technology is helping us, and how we can continue to use technology to improve things within our communities. So things that we're attempting to do, or what we've attempted to do in the past, what we're currently doing, and what we want to do in the future, is educate more Native people in technology. So help them to find roles as software engineers or as hardware engineers, or really any kind of engineering as it pertains to computers. It can be cybersecurity, it can be DevOps, it can be any number of things. And we want to continue to grow representation in those areas. We also want to engage our communities. We want them to be aware of issues of sovereignty. So as I talked before about things related to museums and universities, that pertains to copyright, and many people maybe aren't aware of the copyright that is tied to artifacts or tied to creative pieces of art, like stories from our communities, and to be aware that these things continue on into the future. So like, for example, when choosing a technology to create a dictionary, it's possible that we might use a book because we might need it as a resource to help create the dictionary that we want for our community better. But that dictionary might be copyright, with some other non-native entity. And so we have to be aware and understanding of these issues and engage our communities in them, as well as educate them as well in understanding what those issues mean, so that if we have to create a dictionary from scratch in the future, what does that entail, and what license do we want to put on it? What copyright, if any copyright, do we want to have on it, so that it can be accessed from people in our community without any issues or problems? And discuss issues of sovereignty, just like we're doing now in the conference, like we've done within our Slack workspace. We want to continue to discuss these issues out in the open and get feedback from people, help people think through these issues that they face within their own communities, so people can understand, all the different ways in which, we're being impacted, by these issues of copyright and many other things, many other types of ownership that don't include us as being the originators or the true owners of this material. So all in all, it's really important that we develop a broad and deep ecosystem of Native technologists that are from different communities, that are from different nations, that then the community itself can reach out to them to so that they can explain these issues to their community in a way that their community understands. So as much as Natives in Tech wants to be at the forefront of these discussions, we obviously can't be the ones that reach out to every community and have the capacity to be able to consult and educate all these communities on these topics. there definitely needs to be broad representation throughout all the nations, and to have this expertise and have this knowledge and can speak on it for their community. So what have we done in the past to kind of further these different goals that we're trying to achieve? So, for example, what have we done in terms of education? So currently we have a GitHub repository. We've gotten up to 42 repositories or code projects of various kinds. We have our Natives in Tech website that's up there. We have a native-owned businesses repository, which we're currently working on and continuing to improve. We have an Indigimoji project that one of our members has created, Nick Saylor. We have a MMIW, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women project as well, that increases awareness and knowledge and promotes awareness and knowledge of issues of MMIW to more people. So we have a lot of different and interesting projects, and hopefully different Native technologists are going through the projects, repositories, reading the source code, understanding how it works, running the projects on their own computers, seeing how the projects run in production, going to the nativesintech.org website and seeing how it runs. Those are forms of education. They might be a bit more, for each individual person to take on, but it is a way for people to learn, how to build different technologies using open source technologies that we use. So, things like React, things like JavaScript, things like Netlify CMS, all these different things that are available for us to use that are free and open source. And so if you wanted to replicate any number of our own projects, you can at any time. And so this is, I think, helpful education, but I think we can improve going forward. But this is, just an example of something that we've done in the past. So what have we done in terms of discussing? Well, we started our Slack workspace back in 2017, and now we have close to, probably more now than 212 native technologists in there. And we discuss various issues, we discuss various topics. We will discuss things in the open, in general channels, or we can discuss things in direct messages to each other. It's really a great space to just be open and to share ideas and thoughts about varying things, but also things related to sovereignty and how technology impacts us and how we should be using technology to help us. But in some cases, technology is hurting us in various ways. So how can we go about changing that? And, there's obviously we have the conference, but outside of the conference, we like to use the Slack space to kind of connect with each other. And, that's a great way for us to kind of discuss these topics. And what have we done in terms of engagement? We have various social media platforms. We have had in the past NIT meetups where just native technologists get together and just discuss a topic that they want to talk about. It could be sovereignty, it could be just software, it could be anything related to open source, things of that nature. And over the years, we've been able to grow our social media following. We have almost 2,500 followers, and we are growing on LinkedIn as well as Facebook. And so in order to kind of get the word out on some of these things, we've used social media to do that, because in many cases, that's where our communities reside, or at least a lot of people within our communities probably have a Facebook. And so if we want to reach them and we want to discuss these issues, then we have to meet them where they are. And so using social media as a medium in order to do that helps get the messaging out there. So what are we doing currently? In terms of education, we've partnered with New Camp to provide a scholarship, and it's around $50,000 in total to people that want to go through New Camp's boot camp for learning technology, different technology stacks. So they have courses, or what we refer to as stacks, in different areas. We have front end, also back end, as well as database. And so this is a very important way in which we can help Native people who are interested in getting into technology to kind of take that leap and take advantage of this opportunity, so that they can grow their skills and with a pretty good probability be able to land a tech job after they complete any one of the courses that they want to work on. So if you're interested in doing this, we'll have links to the website for this, but if you just check out New Camp and Natives in Tech Scholarship, you should be able to find this. And it's a $50,000 pool of money, I guess, pool of funds to fund this. But the boot camp usually is around $1,000 or so dollars, maybe $2,000. And so, there's many people that can go through this this program if they just decide to do it. So we're very thankful being able to work with New Camp in terms of offering this scholarship and giving Native people an opportunity to expand into the technology field. What are we doing in terms of discussing? Well, we have the yearly conference where we discuss these various issues, and we have other various initiatives that Natives in Tech members have started. So we have someone within our community that started an initiative that we are putting our support behind, and that is the Apache Software Foundation, using their name and using Native imagery in a very stereotypical and way in terms of portraying Native people, but even more specifically, it's very stereotypical of Native people, but not necessarily Apache people. And so we want to, or we've begun starting the conversation in terms of how do we encourage the Apache Software Foundation to change their name. There's many other names out there. They don't have to use this name. At this point, it's just historical, just like many of the sports teams out there that eventually changed their name. So we think that it's really important for Native people to not just be represented in technology, but to also be respected within the field of technology. And so we're putting our support behind this initiative, and discussing it within our community as well, to see who is it impacting, and talking with Apache people specifically and listening to them and understanding how this impacts them as well. So we like discussing various topics that are important, and but also these can just be initiatives of the community itself. And so we are, as much as we have various initiatives, initiatives will also spring out from the community, which is great. And what are we doing in terms of engagement? We have the Lakota AI Code Camp that we recently had this past summer in South Dakota. And at this camp, we engaged with Lakota students in helping them to learn how to use AI models to then be able to identify medicinal plants using just their phone and the camera on their phone. So the students would take pictures of medicinal plants, and they would then create models to be able to identify those plants. And so it was a great opportunity for students who may not be familiar necessarily with using these different techniques to be able to learn them and to be able to apply them in a very cultural, significant way. So engaging different communities and giving them a path forward in learning these different skill sets is, another way in which we're engaging our communities. And we plan to have another code camp starting in for next summer as well. So what do we want to do moving forward? So in terms of education, we definitely want to write more articles around technology and how it impacts our communities. So we do have a blog, and we haven't used it maybe as much as we would like, but it would be great to write more articles on just various tech topics. An example might be, why do some tribal governments use a .org domain as opposed to a .gov domain? How does that come about? Why does it come about? And why might it be important, if being a tribal government, for it to be recognized as such, with on the internet? So it'd be cool to be able to write about these things and educate more people on these different topics that impact us within the work that we're doing. We want to develop bylaws that represent Native values. So in terms of educating, we're maybe educating ourselves in this instance. So we do have a set of bylaws. They are encoded using a protocol called Git, which is very common in software development. But we want to encode more Native values into those bylaws. So as much as it's great to see that we're using a software protocol in order to make changes and to make updates, we definitely want to encode more values into that as well. And in that process, hopefully we can educate other organizations and help them to learn how they might want to encode Native values into their bylaws. Obviously, we want to encourage more people to take advantage of the new camp scholarship. It's there for the taking if anyone is interested. And potential opportunity to get into the field of technology after completing it. So I think it's a great opportunity. And potentially have conference-like talks, I guess, year-round. Obviously a lot of work. We definitely need more support in order to be able to do that. But it would be great to be sponsored to have these talks, more frequently. What do we want to do in terms of discussing? Well, it's always been an idea to try to create different committees to talk about how we create standards for how we create applications. Just as we have committees for languages, in the field of software programming, there's committees for all kinds of things. There's committees that discuss, how do we, make requests in browsers? How do we add APIs to JavaScript? Well, it shouldn't just end there. We should have our own native committees formed of native technologists to discuss varying standards and, how we build apps that serve native peoples, how we build apps that work in places that don't have great network, all these things. So committees would be great to just discuss, in an open way, what a native app development looks like. So next, we want to create a license, so Indigenous Peoples license. There's currently many different open source licenses out there, like MIT and GPL, but we want something that speaks more to Indigenous peoples. And so there is a repo that's within our GitHub organization that kind of starts the discussion, but we'd like to solidify something maybe next year in terms of, what is an Indigenous license, what does it look like, and how might we apply it to the code and the code projects that we create. We want to also continue to call out the organizations that are undermining our communities and not respecting our communities, such as the Apache Software Foundation. And we also want to continue to develop and strengthen our relationship with other organizations that reflect and align with our values. And what do we want to do in terms of engagement? We want to try to connect with our membership. We have over 212 at this moment native technologists in our Slack workspace. How do we engage them? How do we get them more involved? It's definitely a very critical question because there's a lot of knowledge there, there's a lot of experience, and we can learn a lot from just the people that are there. And but it takes time to cultivate those relationships and strengthen them. And so, but it's definitely something that we want to try to do moving forward. Grow relationships with people outside of our Slack. There's many people that maybe don't use Slack or maybe don't want to use it. Well, how do we engage, those that are outside of that? How do we engage communities? How do we engage younger people, teenagers? How do we engage older people? So there's definitely room for improvement in those areas and ways in which we can or ways in which we should figure out, how we might do that. Obviously, we want to continue to support the initiatives of our members, various projects that they've worked on that we are extremely proud of and happy that they've created. And so how do we continue to support that and strengthen that moving forward? And lastly, we want to kind of give people what they want. We did a LinkedIn post recently asking what people wanted to hear more of, and they resoundingly said, updates from the community. So we want to continue to improve our transparency, I guess you would say, in terms of what we're doing, what we kind of want to do moving forward, so that people can feel connected to the work that we're doing. But of course, it's never that easy. So how do we actually achieve this? Well, it's always going to be you. Natives in Tech, past, present, and future, has always been people like you, a native technologist, someone who is an ally, someone who is interested in these ideas and these projects and wants to contribute. This is we are a nonprofit organization composed mainly of volunteers. And so a lot of the things that I've mentioned about things that we've done, things that we're doing, and things that we want to do, though a lot of those things are volunteer based, and they are just initiatives of people in the community. And so Natives in Tech, the core of what it is and what it will be in the future, is going to be people like yourself that are listening right now and want to get involved and want to take these initiatives forward. So that's how the organization has, that's kind of how the organization founded itself. That's how we've grown. And I think that's how we'll continue to grow and improve in the future. So if you're someone that's interested in these issues, that wants to improve certain areas and wants to be involved in certain areas, feel free to reach out and ask us and let us know that you want to work on these particular causes that are of great concern to you. So hopefully that it kind of explained, what Natives in Tech is all about. Thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to our website, nativesintech.org. But yeah, thank you all. Thank you for attending this conference and listening to this talk. And Manedigoshche, Mado.
All right, Scano, my name is Jeff Doctor. I'm Kaiga from the Six Nations of the Grand River Territory, for those that don't know where that is. I'm Haudenosaunee. We are spread out all throughout Turtle Islands, but my community, Six Nations of the Grand River, we are just southwest of so-called Toronto, or Toronto, in Ontario, or so-called Ontario in so-called Canada. Um, I'm an impact strategist at Animikie Indigenous Tech, and a lot of the work that I do is focused on the ethics of technology, thinking about the impact of all the things that we create. And Animikie in particular, a lot of what we do is custom software. So when it comes to building the custom software, how do we ensure that that is actually done by us, for us, in ways that, are ultimately supporting Indigenous nation rebuilding? So when it came to this talk of developing sovereignty in tech, this is something I've always been super interested in talking about. And I was thinking a lot of how can Animikie kind of contribute into this conversation? And I was like, well, I guess we can just show what it is that we do. Unfortunately, Sam won't be joining us today. She is unavailable because real life is complicated and finding schedules to record at the same time didn't turn out. So you're kind of stuck with me. Now, that said, this is pre recorded. So Sam hopefully will be joining us at the actual conference. And if she is, when this is being actually shown, she might be there in the chat with you there. So either way, she'll be there, or I'll be there, or both of us, and we'll be able to answer your questions throughout. So feel free to drop any questions or comments or anything like that in the chats. And I'm looking forward to talking to y'all throughout this conference. So today's talk about pathfinding. And really ultimately what this is avoiding techno-solutionism in Indigenous nation rebuilding. So where this comes from my perspective, is working in community and being constantly frustrated by the lack of technology that has been built with Indigenous needs in mind. And you really see this in, when you're working in so-called Canada, what we're often called, band councils or First Nations, where there's a lot of software that is made by outsiders, non-Indigenous folks, to support our data governance, but it's clear that a lot of it was never really built with our needs in mind. And so Animikie has been doing this kind of work for a long time to figure out how we actually build things properly by us, for us. And this is one aspect of this. So today's presentation is broken down into the following parts. First of all, what is this thing, pathfinding? I'm going to say this word a lot, and I'll be explaining what it means in a bit, and explaining why that we do it. Further, what are the pathfinding protocols? And then, how is pathfinding actually done? So how does this unfold? What does this look like? What's the process look like? So we're going to be kind of opening up to the public how it is that we do these things for the first time. So kind of nervous about this because, it's a lot of work that we've done in private. And the hope is that by showing y'all how we do it, then it can inspire y'all to, take some of these things, do it yourself as you're building your own tech. So let's just jump right into it, because ultimately at the end of the day, our larger philosophy behind this is moving slow and empowering people. This is kind of the opposite of that classic tech bro dogma of move fast and break things. Obviously, when it comes to working in, any kind of space with vulnerable people or indigenous tech, moving fast and breaking things can hurt people, and that is not what we want to do. So, what's pathfinding? Why do we do it? First, a very quick history of Animikie. I've been here for about 3 years, but the company itself was started by Jeff Ward in about 2003, give or take. A lot of what he was doing was building websites, building databases, doing a lot of custom work, because again, a lot of stuff out there, definitely back then and even now, was not really built with our needs in mind, so everything had to be custom. But because it has to be custom, it takes a lot of time to do things, and it's expensive. So how can we not necessarily standardize, that's not the right word, but as we're developing software that's similar for similar kinds of problems, how can we both build the framework of the software itself so you're not constantly recoding the same thing over and over again, but also how can you systematize or create like a methodology for building like custom software solutions in community for community. And a lot of this is a direct response to like what I would call the entrenched colonialism of tech. So all y'all that are in this conference, I'm sure, have endless stories of what it's like working in tech and what it's like to deal with just the, you know, colonialism in all the words, colonialism in so much of the attitudes, all this notion of extraction and exploitation, and so many things that are in mainstream tech that are super harmful and frustrating. And so, obviously, as an indigenous tech company, this is the opposite of what we want to do and what we're fighting against with everything that we create. And what that means is that we don't have the luxury to just like, build something and throw it out there. We have to do an impact assessment. We have to figure out how that we build this and what's the consequences of what we build. How is that actually going to impact people? And, then we've got the classic kind of product visioning, like what are we making? Why are we making it? Who are we making for? And what's that going to look like? And then, classic project planning, building any kind of technology or any kind of software, especially the more custom that it is, can be very complicated, can be very expensive. Sometimes we're talking about multi-year projects that can be even multi-million dollars, which then speaks to fundraising. As I'm sure many of y'all can relate to, like money in this field is not distributed equitably, and often the people that need it the most aren't the ones getting it. And so in so many times we've had to justify everything that we do to often colonial gatekeepers to fund all of these projects. And how do we do that in a language that they, I hate to say, but like respect and listen to, that still isn't watering things down? So again, the idea is we got to move slow, we got to empower people. Now, when I say move slow, that's not, move super slow because things still need to get done. But it's more a matter of being considerate, being thoughtful, being careful. And at the end of the day, this is about empowerment software. And even when I'm saying people, I'm not necessarily meaning just like human beings, but, all of our kin, all of our animal relations, all of our, what's often called like the natural world, land, water, the trees, the plants, everything that we live in and live with, are also peoples to a degree, and we have to ensure that perhaps they're being empowered through some of this tech as well, because ultimately this is what we want to avoid. This notion of, technology that is this expansion of like the light of the Western glory that moves, Western European, I should say, glory that drives, us away because of all this narrative of progress and manifest destiny and all these things. That I use this image in literally all my presentations because it is, to me, such a prime illustration of technology from a certain worldview that is like literally driving indigenous people away. So what we need to do in a lot of ways is the opposite of this. And one way of doing that is through protocol. So what are these pathfinding protocols? Well, first, simple stuff like meeting rules. So we're building things with other people. This isn't just Animiki that is just looking at stuff on our own and then building it. We have to build things in community with the people that we're ultimately building it for and with. And in any kind of meeting space, you need rules. So this is simple stuff y'all are probably used to, is like, not interrupting people, acting with respect, treating people well, and empathizing with everyone's situation, giving everyone a space to speak. The facilitator role in this pathfinding process, part of that role is also just good hosting, ensuring everyone is comfortable, everyone has their needs met, because this has to be a safe space. So much of what we're dealing with, many of the things that we're talking about, can be very triggering, can be very distressing. And sure, we're building software and tech, but like, why are we building it? Who are we building it for? And what is the actual situation on the ground? And sometimes that situation's pretty grim that we're responding to. So we have to ensure that in the process itself isn't causing harm, and just setting basic meeting rules is a big part of that. Because ultimately, in the day, this is about partnerships. This is about co-creation of software and technology, because we want to avoid the classic techno-solutionism of, we're this company and we have all the answers, and that's we just got to find a quote market that, we'll be able to saturate with all of our magic glory, like the classic idea of, everything when you're a hammer is a nail. Like, that's not what we want to do. We have certain skills, we have certain tech stacks that we work on and specialize in, but at the end of the day, this is about co-creation. This is about building things with the people. So what that means really at the end of the day, it's sharing. And it's about listening and understanding the needs, the desires, the hopes, the dreams, all the aspects of our partners' lives that go into what we're building this for. We have to understand that, and the only way to do that is a mixture of everyone sharing, but for sharing to be done properly, people have to listen. This includes us and includes our partners. This is a two-way relationship, and sometimes, 3 or 4-way, depending on the complexity of some of these partnerships. If we're dealing with multiple, communities or multiple parties to build a really complicated technological project, that is a lot of shared work. And again, going back to rules, going back to protocols, going back to the general notion of co-creation is super important to all of this. Because at the end of the day, ultimately it's our partners and the users themselves that are really the experts of their lives. And what we're trying to do is create like a technological intervention that ultimately is what they want, what they need, and will benefit them, empower them, if you want to use that language. So how is this done? 6 phases. I'll be going into all the details of this in a bit. This is just an overview. And each phase builds upon the next in a consensus building process. And what I mean by consensus building is that with each phase, because we're working not in opposition, we're working in collaboration, but there are different sides to this. So if you think about this, like you've got the Anamiki side, and then you've got the partner that we're working with, they both have different sides that they're bringing things into this relationship. And we both know things that the other side might not. And so that could create, I'm not going to say conflict, but sometimes they have certain needs, we have certain needs, and we have to find a consensus in how to meet everybody's needs at the end of the day. This can be sometimes really mundane stuff, just like, when is stuff due, or how much is it going to cost, or like, when are we going to start building X, Y, and Z? But also more abstract things like, what's this feature going to look like? Like, how important is it to build this in this order? All these aspects of things we have to ultimately agree on because, again, we're co-developing, we're building together. And so largely what we do in Pathfinding is listening and reflecting back what we heard. So much of this process is about asking questions, a lot of questions, and listening carefully to them, and then reflecting them back in a report. So again, the partners know that we're actually hearing what they're saying. So again, we're not this kind of top-down, we have all the answers. We have to listen incredibly carefully and then be able to articulate a lot of different views, a lot of different voices to come up with ultimately one solid idea for like a software development plan. Because at the end of the day, we always have to learn and we always have to iterate on this because the process itself, it has to be fluid. Every time we do a pathfinding project, we learn from it. Sometimes we make mistakes. Sometimes we find, hey, if we did this a little bit differently, or we tried it this way, or, this new person was brought onto the team and they've got new ideas, let's just bring that into the process. Let's iterate on this. And then, so because often we're working on multiple projects at the same time, the idea is that everybody can benefit from this because an improvement, with this project can roll over to the other projects that we're working with. There's no need to keep things exclusive. So this is largely what pathfinding looks like. It, as you can see here, and you probably have to squint real hard, and I'll be zooming in on each of these in a bit, but this is actually a Miro board. So if you don't know what Miro is, it is effectively it's like a virtual whiteboard. And what that is like, if you know, in a physical whiteboard, you can put sticky notes, you can put like pieces of paper, you can put stuff on a big board. We used to do that pre-pandemic. And we wish that we could go back to that, and we're still trying to figure out how we can. But at this point, we're doing a kind of we're doing all virtual right now with all of our pathfinding sessions, but we're still thinking about how can we transition back into perhaps a hybrid environment. So as you can see here, each of these little kind of blocks are actually, those are full-size pages like that you can print out. And the idea is that the red sections on the left represent each phase, and then as we move through each phase, you're moving from left to right. This will make a little bit more sense in a bit. So the first phase is the kickoff. This is where we define the project. This is where we determine deliverables and contracts and figuring out the kind of initial deadlines, because at the end of the day, we have to ensure that we're all in alignment with not only how we are going to work together, but what are all the expectations for this project. And then we actually start getting into the actual pathfinding itself. So the first phase is what we call the overview. This is when we're trying to understand the context, understand the larger picture to why we're doing this, who ultimately we're supporting, and what is it that we're aiming to achieve. So all of our meetings start with a check-in. And sometimes, depending on the context, we'll even start with a traditional opening. Because I'm Haudenosaunee, often we start our meetings with a Thanksgiving address or the words that come before all others. We find this is a very good grounding exercise to ensure that we're all like of one mind, because we start consensus building with a shared upon agreement of reality. And in the Thanksgiving address, it's like literally just going and giving thanks to like all the things, you know, the plants, the animals, like the moon, the sun, like all aspects of creation that we're thankful and we're grateful for. I would like to think that everybody in that meeting agrees with. So far, it hasn't been the case otherwise. But at the same time, if we're working, in another community and we've got elders or we've got traditional knowledge keepers, it's contextual who would be appropriate to start the process, start the meeting. So we want to ensure that every time we start a new pathfinding project, we're doing so in a way that's culturally appropriate. And one quick way to start with that is just the notion of working in circle. Every culture treats circles differently, the order of speaking in a circle. So like in Western culture, you think of, quote, clockwise, going from right to left around the circle. In Haudenosaunee culture, it's the opposite. We go the other way around. Meanwhile, our neighbors, the Anishinaabe, they go, the other way around. So this is a good kind of like both an icebreaker, but also, again, a way to understand protocol of the folks we're working with is which direction in a speaking order in the circle are we going to go with, quote unquote clockwise or counterclockwise. Once we determine that, we put everybody's name in the circle. We've got the direction of the circle that we're going to go. And then we want to kind of get an idea of where everybody's at. So how are people feeling? And if people want to, we can start. It's not like a sharing circle, but it's more like just a way to center everybody if they want to share. Just because, again, like this is virtual, it's kind of hard to determine where people are feeling. We want to get an idea if people are super nervous, if people are just like, really excited and anxious, or people like just having a bad day, not feeling it, and that's okay too. Because we ultimately, again, have to build consensus, and it's important to know where everybody's at in the start of the meeting. So ideally, everybody's all energized and happy, but, if they're not, that's fine. It's totally okay. We just have to, work through these things together. So we start with a whole bunch of questions right off the bat. We call this the executive summary. This is often what you see like the one-pager. So the report itself that we produce at the end of this can be upwards of like 30, 40 pages, depending on the complexity. And the executive summary is where we try to take this whole pathfinding process, which can go over months, sometimes be up to 6 months to do all this, and condense it all into one page, because we're all busy people, time is a luxury, and to really understand everything, sometimes just having that very quick overview is super essential. So this is where we start getting an idea of where we're at in this project. So, basic questions like, what's your organization's story and purpose? We want to understand who we're working with, why they're doing what they're doing, and a little bit of backgrounds about them, because we work ultimately internationally with a lot of very different people and peoples, and we can't assume that we know everything about them just by what's on a website. Sometimes they don't have necessarily a web presence, and so the only way to really understand where they're coming from is just to ask. So then we start thinking about, okay, what is it that we're building? What kind of tech is this? Is this like a learning management system? Is this like a data governance system? Is this like a streaming system? Is this like are we going to be like hosting videos? Like what kind of software is this? And then what's the initiative that this is all a part of? It's kind of like the why are we building this as part of like a larger initiative of, that nation or that community or that government or whatever. And then we want to just ask directly, like, okay, who's going to benefit from this? Very directly, and how? So this is when we start thinking about like what's usually called like the audience, the people that would be using the application. You could call these users, but at this point we're still thinking at the end of the day, okay, who ultimately is benefiting from this? And then what are the goals that they're looking to achieve through this software? Also through the project itself or part of the initiative. These things get all kind of blended together, but we're trying to keep an open mind of, if we had all the money in the world, all the resources in the world, what is it that we're looking to achieve through this software? And then it gets into features. Okay, so you know what goals you're trying to achieve. Well, what do you need to meet those goals? What features are part of the software that you desire, or you think your users, all these people that are going to benefit from the software, what's that going to look like? So what is the executive summary? Again, it's that one pager, and this is kind of like a sample of an executive summary that we distilled from like the meeting notes in the last little section here. So for the purposes of this presentation, I made like a little bit of a demo. I'm not going to fill in like all the blanks for all the sticky notes throughout this whole thing because that's a lot. But let's say for this presentation, this is like an indigenous nation that we're building this for. And we're building like a data governance system because, the theme developing sovereignty in tech, this just seems to fit. And what are they doing? Why are they doing it? What initiative is this a part of? Well, this is part of like the ethical stewardship of their data. So who's the audiences? Well, obviously like the citizens. This gets messy, like what term you want to use, like citizens, members. Again, this is all culturally dependent, how people identify themselves and their people. I'm not going to get into that debate here, but and then of course, so we're thinking about audiences. These are kind of like generic sets of users that we don't necessarily like super rigidly defined, but we're starting to think of like categories of kinds of users that might have different goals, might need different things, and also might need different priorities. Because, oops, I hit the wrong button. Because again, as we're building indigenous tech, sometimes we have to ensure that, again, the people that we're ultimately supporting are getting the benefit out of this. And we don't want, I'm not going to say the wrong people to benefit from things, but we still have to always think about like, who are the people, most impacted by this, or who are the people we're really concerned about having their needs met, the primary audience. And in this case, if this is about, citizens' data, like they should be the primary audience. That's the number one group of people we're really thinking about supporting here. So in this case, we're thinking about ultimately like, citizens, they need, their government is managing their data, and as citizens, they want, access. They want control of some of this data. They want visibility about what information their government or their representatives or whatever term you want to use has on them or with them or for them, and how can they access it? What can they contribute? Because so many times, like our quote unquote governments may have like just really not a lot of information about their citizens for lots of different reasons I'm not going to get into here. But how can they build like, you know, not this kind of like top down like surveillance-y kind of like, you know, culture, but a way that the citizens themselves can contribute and collaborate on information about them. And so this could be features like, you know, uploading data, updating like stuff about them, like even basic stuff like, you know, address and phone details and things like that. They're changing all the time. How can we give like, you know, the citizens the agency to determine what aspects of information they want to share with their government? And then the government itself, when we're thinking about them as a user, you know, you call this leadership. Up here in so-called Canada, we think of like chief and council, at least in the band council system. But this could be traditional leadership as well. This could be any form of leadership that ultimately that community, you know, decides. And then the people administering it. So, you know, you can think of like admin, the people that have to, you know, work in the quote unquote band office or whatever aspect of government, the indigenous version of bureaucrats, if you want to put it that way. How are they managing this data? How do we make their work easier? How do we ensure that they do their job effectively as data stewards so that, you know, they can manage this data effectively, but also pass on reliable information to their leaders, to the leaders of the nation, so that, you know, they're operating with the best information that they have. So they need different features. They need, you know, they need different kinds of workflows. They need to ensure that, you know, the data is safe and secure and they are ethically stewarding it. And then other audiences, stuff like that, are like, you know, outside entities. So this could be settler governments, this could be other nations, this could be businesses, stuff like that. When we're thinking about how many interactions with outsiders on our territories that also need information about our territories, that's a different kind of audience. And, you know, there's information sharing that should ultimately be happening between these folks. So this is where APIs and this is where information sharing agreements can come in, and how can potentially the software have those kinds of features that data is still secure and held by that nation to ensure that nation's data sovereignty is respected, but how can they be the ones to determine what outside entities get to see? Then, you know, there's the general public. So this could be settlers, this could be indigenous people, this could be anybody that just wants to know more about the nation, wants to know what resources are available about, you know, treaties, or what's the history, what's the relationship. There's so many places where settlers have no idea anything about the indigenous peoples whose territory they reside on, or stole, or steal, or whatever term you want to use. They don't know a damn thing, and it's not the responsibility of indigenous peoples to, you know, satisfy settler ignorance. But there's things that we can put out there to, you know, raise awareness, public education, things of that sort. So that could be like a more of a public side to this application. So again, this is just a theoretical application I'm just using for the purpose of this presentation. And this is just like a sample of a one-pager of kind of high-level audiences, features, goals, and that ultimately when this is written down in like one sheet of paper, it's just like, oh, okay, I totally get why this application is super important. So here's where we start transitioning into something that's probably different than most other software companies. So this is when we're thinking about rights and responsibilities. So whose rights ultimately is this project supporting, and what responsibilities do we have to these rights? So in the we here is like, could be anything from the developers, the people working on this project, but also really anyone involved using this software. Everybody's got a responsibility to respect and maintain certain rights. So here in so-called Canada, we've got the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action. We've got the Missing Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls and Two Spirits calls for justice. And of course, at the international level, we've got UNDRIP, or the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So UNDRIP is largely rights-based, and the calls to action, calls for justice, are also in a lot of ways rights-based, but also they're just tangible things that need to be done. And so by identifying them, by making them very explicit in this project, we can not only provide context for the why that we're doing this, but we can also recognize so much work has been done in these so many, so many different reports and guidelines and things of that sort, that we're not constantly reinventing the wheel. We're actioning these things. We're actually doing the things that we're supposed to be doing, and we can be doing this through software, through tech. So UNDRIP Article 31, that's talking a lot about, in a way, UNDRIP's version of data sovereignty, and it talks about the rights of Indigenous peoples, their culture, their data, their information, all these kinds of things. So this is a good kind of standard that Animikie uses. Call to Action 92 in TRC is about businesses, how businesses should ultimately be respecting UNDRIP in everything that they do. So if that's the case, why isn't that happening in software development? And then the calls for justice 15.6 and 15.7, those are talking a lot about vulnerable populations, talking about when we're doing things, how do we ensure that, that women, that different aspects of the population that are marginalized the most, which again, I'm not going to get into here, but needs to be considered very heavily when we're building software, because again, we have to ensure that we're not doing harm, and we have to be very careful to identify where that harm's coming from and who's being marginalized or being excluded. So this is just a quick sample again of different rights that we should be thinking about with, again, this sample software. So we could be thinking about citizens, we could think about clans and houses and families, also Indigenous peoples, and where do Indigenous peoples' general rights come from, and also about human rights. Then again, we're thinking about women's rights, children's rights, two-spirit folks' rights, and rights of folks of LGBTQ plus communities. These are a lot of different intersecting and overlapping rights that we need to be cognizant of when we're building software, because again, we don't want to do harm. We want to ensure what are the basic minimum standards for treating each other well in this world, and what responsibilities do we have to that. So things like, following Indigenous laws, respecting traditions, respecting UNDRIP and basic human rights, respecting labor rights. How can we do all these kinds of things so that when we're building tech, we're not inadvertently causing the very same harm we're trying to get away from? And then I've also identified just a bunch of calls to action, calls for justice, and UNDRIP articles that are common for this kind of software. I'm not going to get into the why of those, but feel free to look them up. So again, thinking about rights and responsibilities, this itself can be an endless rabbit hole. And the biggest reason we put this right off the bat is because, folks working in tech often, could be developers, could be coders, could be just people that are not necessarily trained in, let's say, the human aspect of the world. They might not be thinking about stuff like human rights or Indigenous rights. They're just thinking about lines of code. And so how do we hold folks, everybody in this project, accountable for these basic standards that have been identified in so many places? Not only to just not do harm, but to, basic respect for people's dignity and respect for so much work that has been done in these sectors, and how do we build off of them? So again, because we're working ultimately internationally in a lot of ways, we have to be thinking about principles and values. So Animikie is an impact corp. We are always thinking about, as a company that's driven by our values. These are the Anishinaabe 7 grandfather teachings of humility, truth, honesty, courage, respect, wisdom, and love. So those come from Anishinaabe culture because our founder is Anishinaabe. But while that's our company official values, and then what are detailed in the little sticky notes are how we act those out in this project, we often, that's our side of the table. It's Animikie's side of things. This is how we do things. These are our values. This is the why we do things in certain ways. But how do our partners do things? What teachings or principles, laws, things of that sort from their side ultimately guide this project? because at the end of the day, this is a partnership. We have to understand where our values align, where maybe they could differ a little bit, and where any potential conflicts could be. So it's usually not the case. Usually we have a lot more in common than we think. And it's just a matter of respect and navigating cross-cultural dynamics that is very important to identify right off the bat when you're working internationally. So I'm not going to fill in a lot more things in this template because kind of out of time, and I'm trying to more show the pathfinding process rather than go into too much of a sample. But I wanted to fill in at least some of the blanks to give you all an idea of how we fill these in. So the next section here is measuring success. This is important not only from an impact perspective, but from any technological intervention. How do you know you've been successful? What is it that makes the software successful? And how will you know? Will you know you succeeded? Because again, to move beyond just like harm, how do we build something but know that we actually did what we were setting out to do? It's important. And from an Indigenous perspectives, this is extra important when it comes to respecting like Indigenous data sovereignty. So this gets into a whole can of worms I'm not going to open up in this presentation, but one big thing to think about is like the care principles for Indigenous data stewardship. So this is thinking about like collective benefit of data collection. Who has the authority to control these data? What responsibilities do we have to these data? And what are the ultimate ethics underlying all of these things? How do we consider all this when we're considering success of software and software development? And in terms of measuring that, there's so many different metrics and guidelines and things of this of like impact measurement. This is just one I find pretty good is the Montreal Declaration on Impact Assessment, or something. I might be getting that wrong, and the screen is too tiny, I can't see it. But things that we're thinking about here is like, especially for folks that their funding is based on metrics or KPIs or like key performance indicators. How do we ensure that as we're measuring the success of the project, we're not just like chasing measurements? Like we're not just trying to, meet funders' needs. Ultimately, we really need to be careful about what success looks like and how do we measure it so that any of these metrics are like actually useful, that we're actually learning from the metrics, that we're not just taking this like one size fits all approach, because every kind of every new software development will have different kind of ways to measure whether it's successful or not. And at the end of the day, we don't want to just like, again, chase metrics just for the sake of it. So here's where we start getting into some of the more critical aspects of software development. So we don't really have the time or the space to do a full like risk assessment, or like a formal risk assessment during pathfinding. Instead, we start identifying a lot of high-level potential issues. So these are things that like in the project environment, for example, like, when we're dealing with certain people, when we're dealing with certain contexts, where's like the aspects of risks, of potential harms that could come in from this kind of project. And then there's the technical risk. This is the more, classic stuff you think about with technology when you're thinking about like data breaches or privacy, or even things like, pages moving, like not loading fast enough. All the hard technical stuff are other kinds of issues that we need to identify, we need to think about, we need to explore, stuff like hosting, stuff like bandwidth, stuff like, again, we have to understand what are all the technical needs of that community, and then how do they align with the actual project environment needs. So like the who, the what, the where, the when, the why. The people are just as important as all the technical aspects of things. Then there's accessibility, and this is accessibility from folks with a lot of different ways of perceiving this world and a lot of different physical abilities. So I'm not going to get too much into this slide, but we're thinking about the WCAG, was it the AAA accessibility requirements of W3C org. So this is not like my strength, so I'm kind of rambling here, but this is the aspects of, as we're building stuff, we have to ensure that we're meeting these basic accessibility standards. And how do I identify that on desktop applications and on mobile applications? And then we're also starting to think about, okay, hosting requirements. One of the classic aspects of data sovereignty is like, where's the data residing? Whose servers is this going to be on? Can it cross borders? Or can it be in the cloud, but it needs to be like super encrypted? Then we also need to start exploring like, what's the actual tech stack? So what's this going to be built on? What languages it's going to use? What kind of again, I'm not a developer. I'm not like the super technical person. My background is in techno-sociology, the squishy, the side of tech, not the actual hard stuff. So I'm not going to list a whole bunch of different software stuff. People in this conference are way better and more equipped for that than me. So, yeah. And now we can start thinking about, okay, like the development timeline. So in a perfect magical world, we would get stuff done super fast. But that doesn't always work out. Often there's different funding arrangements. There's different complexities in terms of getting everybody in the same room together. There's so many different aspects of why maybe we don't want to launch things right away. Maybe we've got like a longer time scale, or maybe we do need to launch things right away. We've got different urgencies. So here's where we start, idolizing, like, if we had all the resources, if we got all of our ducks in a row, like, when would we actually want to build this and launch this or have this out in the public? How long is it going to take? And it's also about, managing those expectations. And then from a project management perspective, we need to start thinking about key dates, deadlines, any of these kinds of details. Again, especially if the people we're working with are beholden to outside funders, and those funders are setting deadlines, like, we have to ensure that we're meeting them. And this last, second last aspect of really the project that's all throughout our project is what we called shared language. So these are like key terms. These are all the different relations between terms, but these are also the words that we don't say. So that ultimately, at the end of the day, we're both understanding each other, but we're also respecting each other. So these are all so many terms in tech are confusing that, again, if you're not coming from a technical background, how do you share a language so that non-technical people can understand it? That's the technical kind of stuff, right? But then there's the project terms. So as we're working in a certain context, what are all these wacky like jargon or like terms that are involved in this specific project? Then there's the general terms. It's like if you're working in so-called Canada, you're thinking about like First Nations, Inuit, Métis folks. Like, what do those terms mean? If you're working down south, like, and you're using words like Native American, you're using words like tribe, stuff like this. Like, how do you define these kinds of things? But also the bigger issues, like, if you're dealing with residential school survivors, like, what does that mean? What language is important that you're not inadvertently harming anyone by using incorrect or harmful terms? Like, we need to identify these things. We need to understand that not everybody in the project will be coming from the same understanding of not only the context we're all working in, but just like words that we use. And then the last parts, usually of our first pathfinding session, if we have time. I forgot to mention each pathfinding session, there's 3 of them, takes usually about 3 hours. And so each of these little slides I've gone through in this last section, we try to get through all these, but as you can see, like, often we run out of time. There's usually never enough time, especially if we have a lot of people in the room, and we're constantly figuring out, what's the right time? How much time does it take to do these things? How do we give the time that it needs to have these discussions? So these kinds of questions, we're often thinking throughout the entire process. We're always looking at other kinds of software that are available out there. We're thinking about their limitations. We're thinking about, like, if we're building custom software, like, why are we doing it if other software that's similar already exists? Are we trying to do stuff that those other software can't? Are we trying to understand what's the limitations of the existing market and how are we getting around that? And then, this can be just high-level brainstorming of stuff you throw into, of like, what general ideas do you just have? What are the what we call like blue sky thinking, the big dreams that maybe we haven't identified yet in these conversations? And then lastly, as part of, again, all of our meetings, we want to make sure that we're checking out in a good way. So this could be, the basic steps of project management. How do we ensure the project keeps moving forward? But also, what else can we do? Who else should we be bringing into these conversations? And then, how are we feeling about all this? Again, it's important that we're not ending any of these sessions or any of these meetings on a really negative note. We want everyone to be feeling excited, feeling hopeful, feeling that, we're going in the right direction. So we can just kind of ask this point blank. So this is just a sample. So usually, after the first pathfinding session, we take back everything that we just discussed and we start condensing it into a single report. So Anamika will start working on the first draft. We'll start scheduling the next pathfinding session, and we start thinking through, okay, again, who else should we be bringing into these conversations? What other research should we be doing? What kind of desktop research should we be doing in the meantime? What other kinds of software are out there? There's a lot that we could be thinking about in between the pathfinding sessions. And again, thinking about funding. So we've got some ideas, maybe we've already got some funding, but maybe there's other funding opportunities out there. Because what often we find is that there's a lot of things we want to do with this software. We only have enough money to do this, and how do we phase this appropriately? And again, when it comes to how people are feeling, we want to make sure everyone is feeling comfortable, hopefully feeling excited, hopefully feeling that this is in the right direction, and how we continue moving through this process. Now, I stopped the recording, I looked at the time, and it's 45 minutes in, so I realized I've been talking too much. So apologies that the next parts of this presentation move pretty fast, but I want to respect everyone's time, and there's still things we need to get through here. So next phase, we just talked about the first phase is all about the overview, the why, the who, the what, the when, where. Now we're thinking about the actual users, the people who we're building this for, their needs, their hopes, their goals, their dreams, their desires. How can we ultimately serve them best through this custom software? Often this is called UX, UI, user design, user experience. We do a light version of that, but usually the more deeper version of that is actually in the development process. Right now we're just still doing a high level needs assessment. So again, we start with the check-in, start with the circle order, get a feel for everybody's kind of vibes in the space, and then we start moving into the different audiences. We want to understand who we're building this for. So we want to understand, a little bit about them, basic descriptions, a little bit of details, facts, and stuff like that. And also demographics, goals, frustrations, needs, also technical access. Where are people's skills, but also what kind of technical equipment do they have available to them? Again, from an audience perspective, these aren't individual users. These are groups of users, different kinds of audiences. So we can think in terms of user roles. So user roles is a little bit different than user personas. We usually do user personas later on in the process, but right now we're thinking largely in terms of information architecture. So this is things like user permissions. Who can see what, who can do what, who has access to what. So a user role could be something like an admin or a public user or a citizen user that needs access to certain kinds of data. The questions we ask are kind of normal UI UX questions. Whose life are we ultimately improving with this? What's their goals? What are their challenges? What is motivating them to use this software, and what's frustrating them about existing software? So we both want to know what they're looking for in the software we're going to build, and part of what's of doing that is understanding what are they frustrated by what's out there, because we don't want to replicate that. And then we also have to be sensitive to what technology they have. What technologies are they using to access websites or the internet in general? What's their tech stack or their equipment look like? What's their internet access look like? And additionally, what other kinds of vulnerabilities do we need to know about? So if we're dealing with certain populations that could be criminalized, that could be surveilled, that could be harmed in a lot of different ways, again, we have to really ensure that as we're building this, we're not causing harm through our own ignorance or even our own excitement to build in a really cool feature. Well, if that cool feature could also be used against people could be used for surveillance as well. We have to be cognizant of the risks of that. So we move through different kinds of users. We identify them here. Usually we do 3 or 4, depending on the complexity of the software. And again, this is just at a high level to start mapping out some of the user roles. And this is when we start also drafting user stories. So I'm not going to explain user stories here, but most people here will be familiar with the concept. Basically, the little bite-sized little stories of like, want to do this so that, or no, I can do this so that I can, or I want to have this so that I can, like that kind of phrase in these tiny little stories of every little user helps describe like where the actual software, like what is it actually doing. And we'll list those in our big report through each user role. And so again, we check out and we move on to the next phase, which is the information architecture. We schedule another session. We go back and one thing I think I forgot to mention earlier is each new draft of the report builds on the last one. So this will be the second draft we're doing, which will be incorporating the feedback from all the meetings we've had so far. We build that in, and then we constantly add new drafts into things. So the report's getting bigger, but it's also getting more refined. And the partners themselves will review it to ensure that we got all the language right, that we're actually reflecting what we need to do. And the last phase from Pathfinding really is the information architecture. So this is stuff like designing a sitemap, user flows, wireframes, prototyping. Again, I'm not going to go too much into details of this because this is kind of normal tech stuff that's often done pretty much by everybody. You got stuff like, your sitemap, you've got your user flows, and you've got your wireframes. So we'll do like a wireframe prototype where, we'll do the classic like low fidelity wireframes and then sometimes the high fidelity wireframes and then a click through prototype. It won't be a full functioning version of the application, but just something that gives the partners a feel for, what the application could look like, how it will function, where are the key features being highlighted. This is really important to not only help visualize what this application or what the software will look like, but how it will feel. It will make it come to life much more than just a whole bunch of words on a sheet of paper. And so again, this won't be the final product. This is just largely for brainstorming purposes to identify certain things and really to, again, get a feel for the app. And same thing, we'll check out after this phase and determine what we need to do next. And the next step after this will be budgeting. Actually, no, next step will be approval. So after each one of these phases, we build on a consensus, and then when the report is finalized, we get it signed. And that's kind of like agreeing that, okay, everything in this one big report, we agree with. We've written it. We think that this is what we want. And now that we have all that captured from our end, from Animiki's end, now we can start budgeting. Now we can be like, okay, this is what we want to do. This is what we want to build. How much is it going to cost? And so the final pathfinding report itself, it's broken down into these 3 phases that I've described earlier. You've got the overview, you've got the users, and then you've got the information architecture. And each section building off the last. So once it's signed, once basically all of these aspects of the software are agreed on, then we will do the budgeting. We'll have to go through every one of the user stories. We'll have to go through the wireframes. We'll have to, again, go through the stuff like, respecting everyone's rights and laws and things like that, and make sure that the user stories don't conflict with any of that. Because again, we have to really ensure we're not causing any kind of harm to anyone. How much is that going to cost? What features can we do at certain price ranges? We can have like different kind of pricing options where maybe we'll build this small functionality in this phase, and then in future phases, as we learn, we will add in new features, or as we build in a bigger budget, because often our partners won't have a ton of money, but they need like, a quick win, a quick prototype or proof of concept, so that not only will they actually have something that's functional and useful right away, but they can also use that to pitch for more funding, for more functionality, for more features and things that they can build off of. So in summary, again, Move slow, empower people. Opposite of move fast and break things. You do not want to do that in Indigenous tech, as I'm sure y'all appreciate. And our partners and the users themselves, they're the experts. We are not tech saviors. We do not believe in this notion that like developers are gods and that, the technologists have all the answers. Like, no, we have certain skills. Our partners have the experiences and they also have skills too. And how do we find a match between these things so that ultimately, again, we're empowering people, we're empowering the users. And how are we learning? How are we iterating? How are we improving ourselves so that we're constantly getting better at this, so that we're sharing our learnings with everyone, so everyone is ultimately benefiting from every single project that we do. So with that in mind, we would love your feedback. Apologies for going longer. I don't even know what time it is anymore. But in the chat, feel free to ask lots of questions, and hopefully we'll have some dialogue back and forth. Any additional feedback or whatever outside of this, feel free to reach either me or Sam. My email address is jeff.doctor@animiki.com. Sam's is samantha@animiki.com. You can also find us on LinkedIn or on Twitter as well. Twitter, I don't know how long for me, but we'll find out. But animiki.com is where you'll always be able to find us. So Nyawe, thank you so much for listening, and I'm looking forward to meeting y'all throughout the rest of the conference.
Kenzie, Natives in Tech. Welcome to Find Your Purpose and Put Your Gifts into Action with me, Jace Meyer. I am a Métis woman living on Lekwungen-speaking territory. I have no traditional territory of my own and have lived a nomadic life, moving 34 different homes throughout my journey here on Turtle Island. I am definitely the product of intergenerational trauma, but I choose to be the consequences of my actions. I love experiences, continuous improvement, and to challenge the status quo. And I think the reason I've been able to be successful in tech and business is because I know my why. I know my purpose, which is the gift that I want to offer to each of you. Regardless of whether or not you want to launch your own business or you are an entrepreneur working in a company and trying to be innovative and chart your path of how you would like to grow within that organization. Or perhaps you're just a human being wanting to use this time to be reflective. This workshop is really designed to help you review who you are, how you came to be, and how you can leverage your skill set, what's in your bundle, in a good way. Really, we're going to put your gifts into action. So what are our gifts? Well, I believe your gifts are the skills, the things that you can do, the knowledge, the things in your head, and the attitudes, the things in your heart that serve you joy. We are good at a lot of things, but our gifts, I think, are the things that really light us up. And like I shared about myself, I also believe that you are the consequences of your actions. You are not the product of your circumstances, but it's every choice and everything that you choose to do that really names and sets who you are in the universe. So my offer to you during our time together here at NIT is to help you define what your purpose is and give you some time to action that. It's so rare that we get the time to be reflective of ourselves. So let this be a gift to you in that way. So your choice is to maybe define your purpose for the first time, or to redefine your purpose or polish it if you've already spent time in this practice. My hope is that you tell yourself the truth, that you trust that we can hold to your truth, and that by the end of this session, you feel very confident to share your purpose with others. And the reason I hope that for you is because in my experience, when you're very clear about your why and you're very clear about your purpose, people know how to engage you in a good way. They know to call Jace for help on finding their purpose because they know that that's something that I'm very passionate about. I want to help everybody self-actualize and be the best versions of themselves. But that really took me being willing to name that out loud and to tell people often that that's something I care about. And it's what's brought me into this space today. So there are a few ways that I think that we can come to understand our purpose, and it's going to take us in a backwards look. And I want us to think about who we were when we were young, the gifts and the skills we've developed over time, and what our community asks of us. And then I'll give you a little bit of a framework to think about how to refine and clarify the language you choose when you go about defining your purpose with others. So our first exercise here together today is to think about our 7-year-old self. Now, if you're following along with a friend or family, this would be a really good moment for you to collaborate and communicate with that person or people. But if you're on your own, this might be a great time to pause the recording and grab a pen and do some journal work. Because I'm going to ask you to reflect on who you were when you were 7. And recall, how did you spend most of your time at 7? Now, if I think back to my 7-year-old self, I would have found myself in Toronto, in Ontario, in Canada, in a really big city, attending a Catholic school. Not by my choice, but that was what the military allowed us young people to do based on where we were posted and living. And I'd spent most of my time asking very hard questions of my teachers, getting in trouble for asking said questions. And when I wasn't in school, I was kind of spending all my time with neighborhood kids of all ages, bringing us together on adventures, heading out to the ravine that was behind our row housing, searching for animals and trying to clean up the area, and really trying to educate the people that I lived around about the environment around us, and really learning from lots of different people. It was a very multicultural inner city school in downtown Toronto. So I was, really trying to benefit from the diversity of my community. I was trying to build community, and I was starting to see myself as a young educator and really trying to question and understand why we were learning what we were learning and how come it was those people that got to teach us. So as my 7-year-old self, I was very curious, very challenging, very adventurous, and definitely trying to be a community builder. This is useful information because it informs my day-to-day now. And there is research that has been done to say the things that we did when we were 7 are very strong indicators of the things that would bring us joy in our careers later in life. But that there is a lot of intervention between being 7 and being an adult that is really designed to indoctrinate us in different ways. No thank you to our education system that has in our particular context as Indigenous people, worked extremely hard to remove our beliefs and our cultures from us. So going back to 7 is a little bit of a reclamation process for us, to try and get back who we were before the world told us who we should be. So I want you to start there and really honor that version of yourself. Bring some love for that child self. And actually, for the remainder of our time together, just be 7. You'll stay really open and curious, and we won't have to work so hard to convince you of what's next. When you're 7, you're very open to new ideas. So hello, 7-year-old self. Hello, 7-year-old self. And now that we're young again, and we're seeing the world for the first time, we may be able to access parts of our memories we haven't thought about in a while. And what I love about young people is they don't have a status quo mentality. They don't have a belief that things are the way they are because they should be. They're very open to new possibilities. And they'll see things that many of us as adults has accepted as normal, as unnormal, and unfair, and not right, and could be better. And I love that about our young people. I think that's why we say that our young people will guide us and lead us, is because they're willing to poke holes in what we think are really strong fabrics of our foundation. And so the second part of our purpose workshop today is to take some time to reflect on ourselves as that young person and the things that really broke our heart. So what for you was a original heartbreak? What for you was something that you saw in the world that made you upset, hurt your heart, made you uncomfortable, or you couldn't let it go? It was something that would keep you up at night or give you sweaty palms, or where you really wanted to challenge things. So for me, it was in the classroom. Again, it was in the classroom. In the classroom, I noticed that there were a lot of people missing, that none of my educators looked like me, that none of my peers understood what it meant to be a Métis Indigenous person, and never was that a point of conversation in any of the subject matter we were listening to. And that lack of diversity and that lack of role model and the lack of equity, understanding, empathy, platforming, representation, storytelling about the diversity of our community was something that really bothered me. It was something that I wanted to change. And it was one of my original heartbreaks, is that many people that I went to school with didn't see themselves reflected in the teachers or the curriculum. So that was really interesting for me to reflect on later in my career as perhaps the reason why I'm here as an educator, as an Indigenous educator, working both inside classrooms, inside nonprofit organizations, and inside industry. My career has led me to be an educator in all of those ways, receiving my Bachelor's of Education with distinctions from the University of Victoria, but really championing that learning in my community to ensure that we saw more inclusion of young people, women, and Indigenous folks in the areas of science, tech, engineering, and math in particular, where I've found the ability to learn science in a classroom to be really uncomfortable and missing the mark a lot. Like, how do you learn about water? By reading about it in a book. And I wanted to be a better educator and offer young people access to things that I didn't have access to. So that reflection that I was able to do in the early part of my career as to why I was in the room, why I wanted to be an educator, was really founded on that original heartbreak. And that led me to the belief that when we work on problems that deeply impact us and have for a really long time, that allows us to stay really engaged when the going gets tough. that if we're to solve problems that we don't really particularly care about, then it's really easy to throw in the towel at the end of the day or not wake up with zest in the morning to get started on the work that we have to do. And when I look to people who are unhappy in their careers, or they're not advancing, or something feels out of balance or missing in their life, often what I've observed is that they're disconnected from anything that they deeply care about, that they're not solving problems that are intractable, impacting themselves and their families or communities, and therefore they don't really feel like they're making a difference. And so the invitation is to think about what that original heartbreak was for you, and to ask yourself, am I solving for it? Am I putting good medicine into the world to relieve that ailment in any way? And perhaps if not, why not? What's prevented me from getting there? And there's a lot of reasons that might be true for us. I know that there are some heartbreaks that I've experienced in my world firsthand that would be too much for me to focus on a daily basis. It's too much trauma. So right-sizing the problem in a way that feels good to you is also important. And so in doing a lot of coaching with entrepreneurs who are working in spaces where they've experienced deep pain and trauma themselves, sometimes the hurdle is overcoming that pain and that heartbreak, and really focusing back on the things that brought them joy when they were little, and infusing more of that into the work so that there's a really good balance. So you'll see that who you were at 7 and what those original heartbreaks are, coming together becomes even stronger than doing one or the other. So what was your original heartbreak? And are you working towards solving that for you or your community in the work that you're doing today? And if not, why not? What's preventing you from doing that? Or how might you be able to shift your work into that way, either by using a different lens on the work that you have today, or radically changing the work that you're doing altogether? And this brings me to the next tactic that you can use to help you find your purpose and put your gifts into action. And this is really to think about, what are your gifts? And I want to introduce you to something called a T shape. And it's something that when I look to hire folks, and when I have been looked at for hiring, this T-shape concept informed a lot of what that meant. So it means that all of us have stuff that we're really good at. We could go really deep into one area of work. That might be education for me. But we also have things that we're all right at, many things perhaps that we're also decent at. And that forms kind of that superficial horizontal line that we see in the T. And the vertical line is that really deep knowledge. Maybe that's what you got your degree in. Maybe that's your teachings that you've been gifted and that are understood in the core of your being, where you can connect with your ancestors. And the stuff on the top is maybe the stuff that's newer to you, that you're integrating into your life in new ways. Often they sometimes look like passions and hobbies versus like deep skill sets. But what's so true is that the collection of those things, the horizontal and the vertical part of who you are, is far more interesting and fascinating than just one segment of that. And so often in traditional work environments, folks are only interested in that vertical, really deep knowing of what you know. Might be the skills that you might see traditionally on a resume or CV, but when something comes up uniquely, and maybe we're engaging in a cultural way or in community or communication, and we're up against something we've never been met before, what we look for isn't just those deep skill sets. It's like, what else do you know that you can bring to this situation that can support that situation? And so much of us So many of us, rather, have been taught to ignore those passions and hobbies. Unless we have a degree in them, they're not valid or worthy enough to be considered. But I'd like for us to scrap that thinking, because we are much more interesting and holistic human beings than just what might end up on our resume. So if you were to use your journal now and draw yourself a horizontal line and a vertical line, what skills might go down that vertical? And then, with way more fun and passion and energy, what might also go across that top? And how can we start to shape our narrative about who we are that's holistic of all of those things, especially when we're in the workplace trying to communicate with other people about what skill sets, what knowledge areas, what perspectives we have that may be beneficial to the work that we're doing together? And how then could we show up as our whole selves, because we are more aware of what those skill sets are. So to give you an example, I see myself as a really resilient and creative human being. That's the product of intergenerational trauma and just growing up in this vessel and having this spirit. I also really love to teach through a place of asking questions as opposed to telling people what to think. And that inquiry-based teaching is really something I've spent a lot of time and practice informing. And anybody that knows me knows that I'm not a small thinker, but I'm a very macro, and I like to think about systems and integrated systems. So systems thinking also is something that I put into my vertical. And in my horizontal space, I see myself as an artist. I like to produce content. I'm a coach, both for entrepreneurs, but also on the basketball court. And that really is a reflection of my desire to be a community builder, to bring people together, especially diverse groups of people together, different ages of people. So that's how I would describe myself. And the real shift that happened for me was that when I started to describe myself through the work and the learnings and teachings that I've been given culturally, through my volunteer work, through the things that I learn as a member of groups and teams, and not just the things that I've been paid for, it was only then that I found I really hit my stride in my career, and people knew how to engage with me at higher levels, and I was being brought into new projects. And that's really because I was able to communicate what my skills are in a non-traditional and boring way. I started to tell my story. I started to realize that people have the capacity to hold my truth, and that when I shared my truth, people actually held it in a really beautiful way because I invited them in a beautiful way. And so the opportunity for you when you think about your T-shape is, how might I show up as a more whole person in my work? How might I better communicate all the intricacies of who I am in a way that could be honored, held, and drawn upon by those around me? So that's our third tactic in helping us find our purpose and put our gifts into action, is starting again as our 7-year-old selves and what brought us joy, focusing on our heartbreaks and what we wanted to solve in the world, and then really being clear about what our skill sets are when we think about ourselves in all the ways, as a mom, sister, auntie, friend, community member, Métis Nation member, as a member of the local community that I find myself in today. How do I show up and name all of those things? And this isn't easy. We aren't normally given time to process like this. And also, if we've been taught humility as a principle or core teaching, then sometimes, especially us women, aren't permitted to share in this way, or we aren't permitted to share or feel safe to share in this way outside of our closer communities, our close-knit communities. And so this might be uncomfortable for you. And that's why practicing and doing this together in safe spaces like Natives in TechCon is a really great opportunity for us to reshape that narrative for our own selves and to reclaim who we are. And that can still be done with humility, but also with pride and honor. So that's the invitation for you now. And once you're done reflecting on your T-shape, One of the next natural steps that I can offer to you, especially if it was difficult for you to place skills, knowledge, and attitudes into that T shape, is to reflect on what your community calls on you for. So if you're the person that everybody calls to help raise money when there is something going on in your community or in your organization, maybe you're a fundraiser. If you're the person that everybody gathers at their house, maybe you're a community builder. If they're there because you make the best moose stew, maybe you're a chef and you know your way around the kitchen. If all of the kids surround you at a gathering, maybe you're a natural auntie and you've got innate child rearing and role model skills. So really reflecting on how the community calls you in is a really great way to inform what might be difficult for you to say for yourself about your skill set. And to ask you to take this work outside of this conference, I'm going to challenge you, dare you, to engage with your elders. To go ask your elders in your context, in your community, the gifts they see in you. Sometimes our communities, mine at least, aren't always explicit about what they see. And sometimes we'll allow life to happen for you to learn. But the opportunity to actually hear that from the people you learn from and respect is a really beautiful gift for both them and you, and allows us to build different types of relationships. And this work can be incredibly healing because it also provides you with a closer safety net when things are difficult and you need to be reminded of your worth, or you're struggling through a learning moment and you're not at the part of being excellent at it, you're at the part of being not excellent at it. These elder observations and the asks of your community can remind you of your worth and your value. So the invitation, the gift or opportunity is to have a conversation with somebody that you see as an elder, that you see as a role model. Tell them you see them in this way and ask them for the reflection of your gifts at this moment in time. And tell them it's because you're trying to find your purpose and put your gifts into action. My hypothesis is that individual, or those individuals, if you are willing to stretch yourself further than just one conversation, they're going to invite you into new opportunity relatively soon by the sheer opportunity of having to be reminded about your gifts and how to engage you in a good way, that you will be further engaged. So this is another beautiful way to help put more into your bundle, is to ask others to join you in doing that. And this might also help you overcome the humility barrier of saying it for yourself. It's very difficult for many of us to say, I'm excellent at this. But how beautiful would it be if all of us were permitted and celebrated to say that more often? We would know how to engage our whole puzzle piece in a way that could help us solve intractable problems sooner, more efficiently, with more fun and joy, and with a lot more ease and celebration and honoring. And I think that's the real benefit of creating cultures of work that allow us to not compete with each other, but to know who should lead the flock when, who should take that front bird position when, and for it to be a really gentle and obvious dance, because we spend a lot of time celebrating and naming our gifts and observing one another and reflecting on how we see each other show up in beautiful ways. And then this brings me to our final tactic of helping you find your purpose and put your gifts into action, is really to answer the question, why do you do what you do? And perhaps you can use a really typical user experience design tactic of 5 whys to come up with the because. So this might be the place where things start to unlock for you for the first time. It's like, why did I become a front-end developer? why am I a UX researcher? Why am I an educator? And not because of the first answer of, it makes me a lot of money, or I feel respected by my peers when I'm in these positions, or because my parents did and I followed in their footsteps, or because, I really wanted to break a generational cycle of trauma and rewrite a narrative from my family, or because my ancestors helped instill in me through my dream world as a young person that I had a purpose in this life bigger than I knew. And when you can give yourself permission to unpack why, you get way closer to the heart of the truth. And when you start to share that with the world out loud and not just in here, you start to blow people's socks off. They're not used to someone walking into an interview and saying, I'm here because I'm a cycle breaker. I'm here to make my ancestors proud. I'm here to solve intractable problems for my family. I'm here to reclaim my connection with the land. But those really core truths are refreshing, and the world is desperate for people to be able to articulate that, put it into action, invite others into the space, the solution space, to solve with them. And it gives way more of us permission to share our stories. And I believe that storytelling and truth-telling is the first step to reconciliation, and that reconciliation starts with us individuals, not us as an Indigenous community, but each individual, Indigenous and non-Indigenous. And so to really benefit, we need to know our why. And when we share that why first with people, it's so much richer. That's when I feel my richest, is when I'm in spaces that I can do my truth telling, and I'm accepted and embraced and honored and celebrated for that. And as an educator, as an entrepreneur, as a team lead, I've always wanted to nurture that type of environment. It's my purpose to create learning experiences where people can experience belonging without bounds, where they're not afraid to fail in the pursuit of self-actualization, and where they get to experience joy every day. And I can articulate that as simply and clearly as that because I've done the work to experience who I was when I was 7, and to really capture and hold on to the spirit of that 7-year-old Jace, because I've really spent some time thinking about my original heartbreaks and what I didn't see in the world and wanted to contribute to, because I know what my skill sets are and what my skill sets aren't, and where I can go fill in my T-shape. And because I've asked my elders to help me understand my gifts, and I've reflected on where my community calls me into action. And then I really became clear when I gave myself permission to ask myself why 5 times. But that's my why. That's why I'm here today. That's why I run Koya Productions Incorporated, which is a educational company who's designed to amplify the knowledge of social impact creators, Indigenous entrepreneurs, and unheard youth voices, because I want to create those learning experiences, those communities of belonging, and where people can experience joy every day. And I think that Indigenous knowledge, the knowledge of our youth and social impact creators, will help us redefine our relationships with each other. End point. So Chimiigwech for holding this space for yourself today to rethink, refine, redefine, and re-articulate your purpose, to give yourself permission to believe in the consequences of your actions and put your gifts into action, and to shout it from the rooftop and encourage everybody around you to do the same. It's been an honor to speak at Native in Tech. This is the conference I think I'll learn the most from this year, so I'm going to end my session now, give you permission to hold some more space space in your journal and self-reflection. Give you some time to walk it out of your body and go talk to people, especially if you're just streaming in on your own. And then to go listen to my cousins and my brothers and sisters who are also speaking here this year, and to deepen my learning, because there's so many beautiful topics here that I want to learn from. So again, Chimiigwech, thank you very much in my language for inviting me. Mom, I hope I did you proud. And my community, I hope I did you proud. And I'm very honored to be in circle with you all today. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Natasha Rabsatt, and I am with
Marsha Maxwell.
And we are with If These Lands Could Talk. If These Lands Could Talk is a pending 501(c) organization, and we'd like to tell you more about us.
First of all, there's a challenge that's in the world today. And we have very few people that are Black, Hispanic, Latinx, or Native that are taking part in tech companies. And although many tech companies have done a lot to try to increase this representation, we still see that the language, how people are expressing themselves, and also various aspects of Indigenous culture are often negatively portrayed by big tech. And so many of our initiatives are not being supported, whether Native and Indigenous or otherwise.
And so that brings us into sort of like who we are and what are we doing. So if these lands could talk really came out of this idea that we are all over the world, there's different communities, and sometimes we're not aware of what's happening. We're not aware of the history, we're not aware of the challenges and the successes of different Native and Indigenous communities. We are a global ecosystem that is really postured to support authentic representation of Native and Indigenous people and communities around the world, but really with that digital technology, but on their terms. So we are really focused on ensuring that we are not pushing tech and ideas that our communities do not want. It is working with these communities on their terms of how they want to use tech, if they want to use tech. And we really believe in authenticity.
And also this will foster a positive social impact, not only for the Native and Indigenous communities, but also the other communities that impact upon them.
And so this brings us to our mission here. And really, we're all about supporting Native and Indigenous communities and organizations across the world. And this is using all of this new modern tech, including immersive tech, augmented and virtual realities, and other technologies to preserve the history of tribal lands and to support education for current and future generations.
And this immersive technologies, we realize is not something that many people know about or have experienced. So we're really trying to get it into the hands of people who know the land and know the stories they want to tell, and have them learn the technology in order to tell their own stories.
And so our values are really focused around humanity, and technology, sustainability, and many things. So these are our core values. We value humanity and inclusion. It's about belonging for us, for Native and Indigenous communities, sustainability, ensuring that whatever we're creating is having a positive social impact and impact on the world in the future and the environment. Authenticity, we believe in that authentic representation, people wanting to represent and display their identities the way that they want to.
And this is not just in one generation. It's very important that it's multi-generational approach. And so that the needs and the beliefs are important to everyone in the community. So making sure that we're trying to reach everyone. And also this education, we're really encouraging STEAM education or STEM education where it's needed. And also we're really trying to have the communities generate this within the community as opposed to it being an outside-in effort.
And so just a little bit more about who we are. So Dr. Maxwell and I are the co-founders for If These Lands Could Talk, and we are women of color, and we do come from, we have Afro-Indigenous roots within the Caribbean and different identity. And we've worked in various dynamic roles throughout our careers, involving technology, design, strategy, learning, many different things. And so this is why this is super important to us.
And we've also not just have experience in the Americas, but rather we've lived and worked around the world, working with Indigenous communities in Asia, Australia, Middle East, and America. So we have a deep knowledge of many different cultures.
And with that, we've definitely observed areas of opportunity and of challenge. And we want to be able to support those communities through the work that we're doing with If These Lands Could Talk. And so projected impact, there are many areas that we feel that we are able to support in, and these are a couple of them. Really focus on building that digital literacy. We recognize that part of the battle with technology is understanding what it is and how it is used, and building that literacy into eventually fluency. And so we see that as a really important part of our mission.
And it's really important that especially with immersive and all of these modern technologies, we're building out the fear factor. We want people to be familiar with it, comfortable with it in order to build that literacy. So getting it into the hands of the students and into the hands of the communities in order for them to play with it, learn it, and know how to mold it for their own purposes.
And with that, we're also invested in supporting building literacy also around the evolving concept of the metaverse. And so that will be critical, especially in the future as the world progresses even further with digital technology.
So we're using various technologies, and technology is a very broad term, not just the devices like your computer or your phone, but rather looking at new fields like augmented reality, which is when you can experience objects on your natural environment, mixed reality, where you're mixing the real and the artificial, and you're actually being able to manipulate these artificial or digital assets. Virtual reality, where you're fully immersed in a new experience, where you can turn, look around and everything around you's been digitally created. And also the metaverse, which is where it's incredibly immersive environment, where it's collaborative, it's open, it has 2D and 3D engagements, and not just thinking about goggles you wear on your head, but rather your phone or your computer. You can also enter and be a part of the metaverse. So all of these topics might sound very foreign to some people, but it's where the world is going. And we're really concerned about this digital divide becoming a digital chasm where if you don't get in now, you won't be able to understand and be a contributor, rather than having to have these same misrepresentations over and over again. So we need to get in there and kind of plant a stake in the land and be able to be a part of how we shape this new digital environment. We also are talking about emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence and robotics, Web 3.0, NFTs, blockchain. There's so many things that are happening in this emerging world, and we want to make sure that everyone has a part, as much of a part as they want to have in these new emerging and immersive technologies.
And one other part that I think is really important, especially as we look at Web3, we're in a Web 2.0 world right now, is that we're already starting to see a shift in mentality around how we use our data, right? And so it's not just only the technologies, but learning how to manage our privacy, manage how we interact with others. So moving towards that Web3 mentality, I think will also be critical in this journey that we're on.
And it's not so much, not only, protecting our data today, but looking at how we're going to be using it in the future, what things are what rights we may have to give up. And if we're not a part of that conversation, then again, we don't have a say in what happens. So these are, we're proposing our next steps, which is our If These Lands Could Talk Metaverse Meetup. And Natasha will talk more about that.
Sure. And really what this conversation will be about, we're looking at doing a meeting up next spring. This conversation will be about bringing Native and Indigenous change makers, allies, supporters, and other partners into a metaverse space where we can really brainstorm and think through different ways that we can be effective. And this is around building community, collaborating, meeting each other, working with each other, supporting each other, related to other land and technology related initiatives that are important to Native and Indigenous communities across the world. So we're really looking at that networking, sharing, brainstorming, because many of us are doing different things across the globe. And so the idea is we can start to centralize and start thinking about those ideas together and allowing that to blossom.
And we're doing many different things, but some of us are, doubling up on efforts. So this meetup would be very important, a good time for us to start sharing what we're doing and making those nice, collaborative networks that we can kind of tackle these problems together. And one thing I'd like to bring out too is that, this is not a meetup where we have all the answers. This is something or some place where we're going to be voicing some, raising some questions, understanding what we are doing, how we can help one another to be more impactful and more creative in our approach. And also really just the first steps in establishing a presence, a meaningful presence in the metaverse.
And we are able to be contacted right now through email and through our website. We are a newer organization that's getting off the ground, and this initiative is really important to us. It's I would say, part of our life's work, and really we're focused on supporting Native and Indigenous communities to continue on their quest towards that self-determination, and specifically with technologies and posturing for the future.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining this session. My name is Karan, and today I'll be talking about integrating the Google Assistant for continuous integration. So before I begin the presentation, I would like to thank the entire team of the Natives in Tech Conference 2022 for giving me this opportunity to present my talk. So thank you so much. So here's a brief background about me. So I have been working primarily as an Android application developer for the past 5+ years now, and I've been involved mainly in developing B2C and B2B based applications. I've also been involved, developing applications on cutting edge technologies like AI, AR, and VR. And more recently, I've been also involved in a couple of DevOps projects as well. And I would say, apart from being passionate about technology, I also love writing poems, traveling to different places across the globe, and meeting new people. So that's about me in a nutshell. Now, in order to understand more about today's presentation, we need to first try to understand three important terms. And I think these terms are more or less very familiar to all of you, and you might have used it in your day-to-day life. The first is basically agile development, which ever since the Agile Manifesto has been introduced, everyone is familiar with this term. So they say that agile development is winning, and the reason is that it produces better quality, it has an improved efficiency, and most importantly it is result oriented. So one need not actually wait to fill the frag end to finally get the final product. You can actually see the results and in kind of in phases. And the next term is something called as a culture of continuous integration, which again might many of you have already heard about it. But the important part is that in continuous integration, it is important that all the integration tests or all the integration results which are there are made visible to all the stakeholders. It involves integrating more often, and placing all your assets into a centralized repository, and applying the best software engineering practices on them. And the thing that I am excited particularly about is about voice first technologies. Now they say that voice first technologies are the next big thing, and one needs to understand why exactly. So let's understand more about this. So now they say that we all love data, right? So Gartner is one research organization out there which has predicted that 25% of digital workers will use virtual assistants on their phone by 2021. So this is something that is a big prediction. And one can actually see that the number of smartphone users is going to increase day by day, and the number of users using voice assistants on their smartphones is also going to increase day by day. So however, say considering the fact that the users are going to increase, there's also some problems which are right now associated. So right now, as developers, we are no longer working on the simple systems out there. Our systems are no longer a single system where it has simple backend and a front end. We are now working on complex heterogeneous systems where you have multiple multiple backends, and you have to connect to multiple kinds of systems. In this case also, as developers, we are we need to also ensure that all the test cases what we write are correct, and they run properly, and we try to identify defects as early as possible. But the only concern is that we need to do all of this, all the tasks that we do, we have to do it against time. So time plays a very important factor in this case, and time management becomes especially important. So moving on, so as as software developers, or even as software professionals, we all want information to be on the go. So what do you mean by this? So we all need information so that we can access it from anywhere, be it mobile, be it web. So we need this information so that we can do certain tasks based on that. So it is important that all this information that we have, it comes to us on a very frequent basis. So, like for example, in case of a DevOps environment, you would say that when was the last build delivered, or how many test cases actually passed or failed, is some some of the questions that we often seek answers to. So moving on, we need to also understand, like if in case we had to implement a solution, but in order to implement a solution, we need to understand what are the challenges basically involved in implementing this kind of solution. So the first challenge that exists is about the dependency and the communication, and this becomes especially relevant when you are working in large software projects where you have stakeholders which are of different backgrounds. So you have cross-functional teams where you have maybe a software tester, you have a developer, you have someone from the project management side. So communication becomes a very important factor, because even the slightest of miscommunication can create a wrong product. And secondly, basically, we need to understand that a lot of time basically has been spent around developing interactive web portals, and a lot of websites have been developed. But then the fact is that a lot of time has been already spent, and then the more the time we spend on it, the more the time we have to spend on maintaining it. So all these factors are also contributing to the challenges that exist as of today. And one of the key challenges that exist is about personalization. So personalization is also something that we need to take into consideration, especially when you're creating any kind of a voice based interface. So coming to the proposed solution basically involves creating a voice-based interface that leverages an AI. So in this case, we will go with something called as dialog flow, and this is basically used to communicate using a natural language. So we can use natural language for communication. So let's see the architecture of the system. So the architecture of the system basically involves two blocks. So one is an integration and a fulfillment block. So the integration block consists of something called as intent matching. So intent is basically an end user's expression. So an intent matching would basically mean to match the expression which is provided by the user against a set of particular known phrases. So in this case, if you want to say start a build, so the word start would be basically would resemble an intent for you. And this is basically followed by webhooks. So webhooks are nothing but kind of connectors which would basically connect to some kind of a service. And in this case, as you can see, the webhooks are basically will be connected to some kind of a RESTful API. The RESTful API would be again something that would be exposed as a part of the underlying CI framework. So in this case, I have used Jenkins, for example. And using this framework, one can actually connect to the the underlying APIs, and then use the information from the the CI system to basically provide any kind of response back to the user. So if, for example, if the user says he wants to view the status of particular job, so all he would say that tell me the job status, and this would basically should be able to fetch that job status from the underlying CI framework, and retrieve it back to the user. So this system basically has a lot of ups and downs, but then there are a lot of things that can be improved, especially on the intent matching. So here, since we're using Dialogflow, we have the advantage of using the ML based, either the ML based or the rule based grammar, which helps to improve the accuracy of the the matching of the intents. In this case, the fulfillment, as a part of the fulfillment, we have developed APIs which can be hosted on any a cloud service. So in this case, I have used Hiraku as a platform as a service to host those APIs. But in any of your project, you can use any other platform as well. And this would basically serve as a backend so that it can connect to the APIs, and it can also fetch the information directly from the CI underlying CI system. So what are the benefits of this kind of solution? The benefits basically are in terms of saving of time. Yes, definitely it will help to save time and a lot of manual work, and it uses natural language. So definitely there is a lot of scope in terms of how one can use the system, and how in terms of the training as well, because since it uses natural language, one need not actually explicitly have a kind of a dedicated training for this. It can it can be given to any any person, and he can use it freely. And this kind of a system basically helps you to streamline, I would say, the DevOps kind of processes. So even in case of a remote scenario where people are not working in office, and they want to access the system from their smartphones using and want to understand what is the status of certain jobs, then they could do that using the voice assistant on their phone as well. So, moving ahead, so these are the couple of references based on which I created my presentation for today. And, we are also talking about in terms of how the future of this kind of solution exists. So, yes, the future, it's depends on the number of interfaces, the voice-based interfaces that are, going, increasing day by day. So, smartphones and tablets, are already personalized. We see a lot of wearable devices also coming in into the market, so maybe definitely that would be an area. In terms of, I would say, security and user verification is one area where a lot of research is ongoing to improve that parts, because authentication becomes especially important when you're using a voice based communication. And I would say that going forward, yes, if one can have voice based assistants or voice assistants integrated into their own DevOps kind of environment, it would definitely help to benefit at least a lot of people in terms of carrying out their their mundane task, and help to reduce the time to take that takes to carry out those tasks. So once again, I would like to thank the entire team of the Natives in Tech conference for giving me this opportunity. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me via email. And thank you so much again for joining in. Thank you.